You think he's gone? He's not gone. That's the whole point. He's never gone.
Is this some radical new therapy?
You see?
Hello and welcome to Red Hot Steelers Takes. I'm your host, Bob Quinn, and tonight we're going to talk about several subjects. Before we get into the show, there was some news that broke this afternoon, and it's more of a rumor than news at this point. Excuse me, I'm still fighting a cold, so this may not go as long as I normally would. But that being said, let's try to get through it. Looks like Davante Adams is rumored to be coming to the Steelers. It's nothing official. It's just a rumor. But that being said, Adams is a guy who, if he came to this receiving core with Michael Pittman and DK Metcalf, he's such a good, accomplished route runner. I almost wonder if he becomes a guy who's a power slot for you, or if it becomes a situation where DK moves inside to the slot. You've got Pittman on the outside. You got a lot of versatility with that lineup. And then if somehow that happened, I think that's a huge signal that Aaron Rodgers is absolutely coming back here in the next week or two. We'll talk about the deadline that's been set for him. But that being said, look, Davante Adams, Michael Pittman, DK Metcalf, probably receiver in the draft. I think it rules out that you're going to pick a wide receiver in the first round if Davante Adams comes to the team, although maybe necessarily it shouldn't. But that being said, if you're going to use the first on a guard, a safety, Jacob Rodriguez, a linebacker, kind of like that idea. But that being said, let's wait and see what happens. But that Davante Adams stuff is real interesting. So let's talk about what we're going to go through on the show here tonight. So we're going to talk about the NFL referee lockout, how it could impact the Steelers, how it's going to impact the NFL in general. I'm going to talk about Art Rooney speaking out on Aaron Rodgers. Talked a little bit about Aaron on Friday in the with Chris and talking about the rumors that he wants $30 million, all that good stuff. And then of course we're going to do our mock draft. So let's get into it and talk a little bit about the NFL here. All right, so there's a pending referee lockout, and they're negotiating. They're going back and forth, and some of the issue here is that they do want to raise from $400,000 per year, where they are getting paid around $250 an hour. At least the crew chief is getting paid around that. And sorry for the double print here. I thought I fixed it. There's going to be a instant challenge where they can overturn an obvious bad call. My problem with the whole I will overturn the obvious bad call is, they're already going to New York for replays. And what the heck is going to happen if something like what happened in Buffalo and Denver, and the guy looking at the replay makes the same terrible call, or they slow it down to an eighth of a second, and hey, this guy had it, no he didn't, this guy had it, no he didn't. It really bugs me that when there was an egregious play a few years ago with the Rams and Saints with the pass interference, and then all of a sudden the next year we're going to reverse everything. And now this year, okay, well, maybe the Denver call wasn't the most consistent call, and they linked it back to the whole Aaron Rodgers when he threw the pass to himself thing. Now, all of a sudden, we're going to have it for this year. It bugs me that is what the NFL is going to do. But that being said, do I think it's the worst thing in the world if you can correct an obvious mistake? No, I think it's a great thing if you can correct an obvious mistake. The problem is who's correcting it, and are they going to fix it? The other thing I thought was really interesting, and the referees apparently are pushing back quite a bit on this, is remedial training for the referees who score out poorly during the season. Now, what that basically means is they're going to have to take courses, and there's rumors that they would actually have to rumor in the UFL, in the Spring League, to get themselves recertified is probably a bad word, but if this became a relegation system where if you do a bad job, you go down to the minors, and then you're working on the actual, okay, here's minor league football. and then all of a sudden you come back and you do a good job, you get promoted back up, and then maybe the worst referees of the next season, I think that could only help. But they are already talking about going to replacement referees. Why this billion-dollar industry has to pay part-time fucking employees to work as their referees makes absolutely no sense. Look, in the 70s, I got it. A guy who makes 60 grand and they were CEOs and all this other stuff, and they just did it on the weekends. Oh, okay, no problem. Okay, maybe in the 80s, you started to become a really big business. Okay, maybe I get it a little bit, but not as much as the 70s. At this point, gambling is so involved in the league. You need to be beyond reproach. Where the fuck are the full-time employees? If you are going to lay down in bed with gambling, but you're only going to pay referees a part-time salary, who, look, for regular Joes like you and me, is $400,000 a part-time salary? No, that's really good money. We'd all be very happy with that. But you're controlling $1 billion industry with gambling, and all of a sudden you're going to pay these referees $400,000. I mean, how long is it going to be till we get? And remember, that's the referee who's making that. The linesman or whatever, they're still making good money, but they're going to be making $100,000 less than those referees. How long is it going to be before we get a Kevin Donahue situation? How long is it going to be before we start wondering, are these games fixed? And look, is the NFL going to become the WWE? Probably not. But at the same time, why take the risk? Why not just pay these guys? Hey, look, start now. If the guys who are the senior referees right now are like, hey, no, I'm not quitting my job. I want to continue to do this. Let's start phasing it out. If we're going to have all this remedial training and replacement referees and everything else, then let's start a training program now, so that 5 years from now, every NFL referee is a full-time employee. And if you don't want to transition to full-time and you want to make 400 grand, then fine. Shut up, take your paycheck, work part-time, but we're going to work towards a full-time actual system of the referees. This kind of goes hand in hand. There was another announcement from the NFL this afternoon where it looks like they're going to partner with a flag football league and try to start a worldwide national flag football league. It's already, look, if you're a Steeler fan, you like to see football played a certain kind of way. You want to see, the hard hits, and you want to see, and some football fans are like that. But if the transition here is to turn it into flag football, go watch last year's Pro Bowl and tell me if you think that product's entertaining. It's not entertaining to me. I'm a longtime football fan. I mean, it's appealing to demographics that, frankly, look, if you want women to play in the sport, great. Have a national women's flag football league. Get the NFL behind it. People might actually watch it, versus the WNBA, because, you're not talking about, to me, a lesser product when you watch the WNBA. Maybe the NFL flag football product would be a nice product. You want to have that as a minor league offseason distraction? Fine, but it just smacks to me as that continued step forward to where, it's kind of the old dodgeball thing. You took the dodgeball out of schools, and, a generation later, we got a bunch of people who are, have anxiety and can't collect their thoughts. And now you're going to take away the physicality out of football and put this flag football product out there. You might as well be the NBA, and far too many younger fans, I think, with fantasy football are getting into an NBA mentality. That whole, the JJ Redick plumbers and whatever, those guys in the 70s and 80s were not plumbers who were playing the game. The guys in the 90s and the early 2000s, those guys were hit. And in some cases, I would make a case that you could take teams from, maybe not the 70s and 80s unless you gave them the training, but I think if you went back and you put out the 2008 Steelers, the 2010 Steelers defenses, teams from that decade, I think would have no problem competing in this era. They might all get thrown out of the game, but I think they'd have no problem competing as far as that goes. So let's switch gears a little bit. Let's talk about Art Rooney. At the owners' meeting, he said that he expects that they'll get an answer on Aaron Rodgers before the draft, according to Jerry Dulac. So here's the deal. I kind of said on Friday, and I stand by this. Aaron has his own timeline. Aaron's going to do whatever he wants, whenever he wants. And I think the Steelers have known for a month. I think there is no question that the Steelers knew he was coming back, which is why they weren't players in free agency. Now, if you believe Charlie Batch, and I know Andrew Filipponi on the radio today made a big deal about believing Charlie Batch because he's got the NFLPA connections, works for the Steelers. I understand. I don't think Aaron is waiting for $30 million. Number one, from a salary cap perspective, Steelers don't have it. I mean, are you really going to restructure TJ Watt and guys like that so you can re-sign Aaron Rodgers for $30 million for 1 year? Look, if the guy wants to get paid $20, $25 million compared to what backups make and compared to what Malik Willis got paid, I got no problem with that because you can probably figure it out in the salary cap with no problem. But the problem I have is if they really do get into a situation where you're going to pay him $30 million for 1 year, let's say you get Jalen Ramsey to sign an extension and you can lower his cap hit. Let's say you sign Joey Porter to his extension in the offseason, but you don't have to start paying him until next year. In a vacuum, is he still probably the best option? Yeah, he probably is. But it's starting to get expensive and it's starting to get a little bit wonky. Now, the whole, hey, I don't want Aaron Rodgers to hold us hostage crowd. Look, I get what you're saying, but Aaron never held the Steelers hostage. I don't think last year. I don't think this year. The Steelers let themselves be held hostage. And I'm not going to blame a player who tells the organization last year, hey, look, if you got to move on, move on. And who probably told them this year, look, if I play football at all, I'm going to play for Pittsburgh. But there's a question of, am I going to play? And if I don't think that's going to come down to money, I really don't. I think he wants to be paid a respectable salary, but I also think at the same time, it's not about money. It's not about whether his wife, wants him to stay in shape so they can have sex or whatever. It's literally, it's just going to come down to, do I want to put myself through this again? And do I think I remotely have a chance to win? Look, you put Devontae Adams out there, and all of a sudden, I think Aaron Rodgers is getting really excited with Dowdell, with Warren, with Freiermuth, with Washington, changes the draft strategy. Maybe all of a sudden a guy like Eli Stowers is in play. It's really, really interesting for the Steelers. And, hey, maybe you turn around and you get a green dot with Jacob Rodriguez. Second round, maybe you get a guy like Ted Hurst who's shot up the draft boards. It could be, or maybe you get another safety, or you get a corner. If you told me the first two picks in the draft are Jacob Rodriguez and Chris Johnson, I don't hate that. Especially as long as you're coming along in a third, you get a wide receiver if Devontae Adams is on the team. But let's see what happens. But just in case Aaron doesn't come back, let's talk about who potentially could play quarterback for Pittsburgh. Now, I'm going to preface this for all you Masonites. It ain't happening. Okay? There is no reason to watch Mason Rudolph play football in Pittsburgh under Mike McCarthy. It's not a solution. At best, it's a stopgap. And if you're thinking, well, Mason can transition to Will Howard, there's a name on this list I'd rather have transition to Will Howard. But if you go to the draft, I personally am not a huge fan of this guy, Garrett Nussmeier, but he is kind of a gunslinger. He came from LSU. His dad's a coach. There's some New Orleans connections, which means there's McCarthy and Omar Khan connections. It's a name that's starting to float. I don't love it. I don't want to see it. But, if it happens at pick 99, I guess we can all live with it, because if it's a throwaway third-round pick, whatever happens, happens. Now, that being said, this is a guy I really like. And I have seen him in some cases go all the way up in the third round. I've seen him in many mocks stay in the 7th. I think if this is one of your first or one of your 4th round picks on day 3, this is the guy who I think has the potential to possibly be a starter long term in the league. That's Cole Payton from North Dakota State. I think there's a learning curve with the adjustment of the competition, but the guy medium and intermediate routes is insanely accurate. Now, was that because he was throwing to Bryce Lance and he was wide open? Maybe, but his passes weren't 40-yard bombs down the field. I mean, they were 20-yard, 15 to 20 yards. He was the most accurate quarterback in the nation. Excuse me, like I said, fight the cold. Next guy on the list, Cooper Rush. Okay, if you followed the previous podcast I was on, you know what a fan I am of Cooper Rush. Let's start. There's a Dallas connection here. And all things being equal, this guy isn't the worst quarterback in the league, okay? You're not going to win a lot of games. You're not going to the Super Bowl with Cooper Rush. He's not your long-term answer, long-term starter. But if you're looking for a bridge guy to maybe keep you in it until, okay, we're out and now we can play Will Howard 8 to 10 games, Rush is not a guy that I discount. I think he's a guy who has still some upside. He played pretty well for Dallas a couple of years ago when he was in the lineup for Dak. I like Cooper Rush. I like some of the things he does. But like I said, is he your long-term answer? Absolutely not. But when you look at who's available in free agency right now, do I prefer Cooper Rush over Mason Rudolph? 1,000,000% I prefer Cooper Rush over Mason Rudolph. The last guy on the list is Will Howard. Look, at this point, if Aaron doesn't come back, do I want you to pick a guy in the 3rd, 4th, 5th round to compete with Will Howard? Yeah, I do. And I'm not 100% convinced that Cole Payton wouldn't beat him out in a head-to-head competition. I think if you get into a Taylor Green in the 6th, 7th round, he's not going to beat out Will Howard. He's a guy who's got to sit for 2 or 3 years. I think if you're taking a flyer on him, does he have traits? Yes. But when the best thing I can say about my quarterback is he runs fast, I don't know. I mean, Seattle, they went out and got Sam Darnold. I think maybe the thought was at some point Jalen Milroe takes over, but Darnold took him to the Super Bowl. So that plan's out the window. I mean, Milroe is probably going to sit for 3 years. And then, if he's lucky, he gets the Malik Willis treatment and plays a game or two, looks pretty good, and gets a nice, decent second look contract somewhere else. But, at that point, if Aaron retires and you can't pick one of these guys in the 2nd, or the Nussmeier, you're probably going to pick on day 2. But let's just say Nussmeier was there in the 4th, Payton was there in the 5th. You take a flyer on him, great. You bring in a guy like Cooper Rush, you turn it over to Will Howard, and let's see what happens. I thought it was interesting that Will Howard, McCarthy seemed to cool on him just a little bit in his, from what I've heard on his interviews today. And I also thought it was interesting, I saw Alan Saunders put out on X, that it seems like he's not sweating Aaron Rodgers coming back. So I think that's pretty much at this point a done deal. So, all right, let's move on. So NFL draft just a couple of weeks away now, April 22nd in Pittsburgh. So we'll be looking forward to seeing what happens. But let's jump into our mock draft here. If I can get the computer to work, of course. It's not cooperating. Bear with me 1 minute. We're going to use PFF. Let's remove this. Let's add. There we go. Okay. So here's what we're going to do. Okay. Last week, I kind of made the mistake of jumping into the draft before I did a trade. I am going to try to trade back. And I'm specifically going to try to trade back with the Dolphins. So I'm going to look for the Dolphins here, who are obviously, you would think they're not one of these teams that's going to go crazy here, but I'm going to look for pick 30 and pick 43 for pick 21. And I'm going to see if I can get us some steals here. And they didn't trade, so we're on the clock. So much for that idea. All right, so whoop. I don't know what happened. Bear with me. Seems that it does not want to cooperate today. Which is good, because maybe we get another shot at the at picking and getting a trade done. So let's bring this back up. PFF mock draft. Let's share the screen. See if it'll work this time. And like I said, I love doing this with you guys. I do have 101 fever, so bear with me if I hit the wrong button here. So we're going to share the screen. All right, we're back in business. All right, so we're going to drop the care for positional value all the way down. We're going to put draft for needs all the way up. 7th round, enter the draft. Let's take a look. All right, so we're going to try to pull this trade off again. So we're going to go 30 and 43 for 21. Offer the trade. They say no. So let's see if I can throw pick 99 in here and offer the trade. They still say no. All right. No trade for us. We're starting the draft. Let's make it happen. All right. So what do we have available here? We have Keen Messidor. We're not going edge. Deal Warren. That's the guy we really like. Omar Cooper. I know a lot of people are fans. I'm less of a fan. I still think he's a high floor, low ceiling kind of guy. Based on what's available, there are 3 trades available. Let's see who's interested in moving on or over with us here. Let's see if I can. Thanks for hanging in on technical difficulties there. So let's try this again. Don't know what happened there with the there. We're gonna All right, and I'm back. The technical difficulties. I'm really sorry about this, guys. For some reason, my computer does not want to work correctly. So what I'm going to do is I'll post my mock draft as we go. I'm going to have to do it off the screen so that we don't lose the screen again. So I appreciate you guys hanging in and watching. So I'll tell you what we've got going on here as we go. And let me get the mock draft simulator. I do not know why it's glitching out on me, but like I said, I appreciate you guys hanging in. While it's trying to load, if anybody has any draft questions, feel free to shout them out and hit me with it. I continue to see that Casey Concepcion is sliding up the board in wide receivers. So I think that's an interesting possibility for the Steelers, especially if we don't get Davante Adams. All right, so now it looks like we've got this right. I am absolutely not going to try to trade since it keeps glitching out if that happens. I'm going to try to share the screen one more time. If it doesn't work, then I'm just going to post it on Twitter or X or whatever the hell you want to call it. All right, there we go. We're starting the draft. We're going to hope like heck it works. We're going to go fast. All right, so, this is an interesting one. So I haven't seen this guy pop up too many times in my mocks here lately. C.J. Allen is an interesting name. I do think he's a guy who has a lot of upside in the NFL. I just don't think he's right for the Steelers. I think he's a little too young to put the green dot on him right away. So not going to do that. Avian Terrell, man, I really like that guy's slot corner. I really do, especially now that we got Dean, we got Joey Porter, you bring Terrell in. That's an interesting name. And then Omar Cooper at wide receiver here. So I'm going to assume that we somehow pull off the trade for Davante Adams. So my first pick here, we're going to go Emmanuel McNeil-Warren. Big hitter is a safety. I know there's some thought about maybe trade up for Caleb Downs. Look, if I'm trading up for Carnell Tate. I'm not trading up for Caleb Downs. To me, he's a little bit undersized. I'm trading up for Vega. But not Caleb Downs. I mean, 5'11" medicals, it just screams red flag. Look, the guy might turn into a Hall of Fame player, but I'm not sold on a small guy with injury history. I'm not going to do it. So again, I'm going to assume that we somehow pull off this Davante Adams trade, and I'm going to draft accordingly. So that makes this very interesting. So I really like Keontae Scott. Yeah, he's grown on me a little bit here during the process. I like Jennings Dunker. But I don't love drafting a guy to move from guard, to move to guard. If I'm going to draft him as a tackle, I really want him to play tackle. Treydon Stukes is an interesting guy. Egan Badasan is I hope I said that right. Man, I really love Eli Stowers. If you're familiar with any of my draft stuff, that's a guy who I think is going to be a star in the league. Let's take a look and see. They want to trade with us. Well, we ain't trading with the Browns or Ravens. Let's see what the Packers want. It doesn't have enough. So I'm going to draft Eli Stowers right here because I feel like if you can get a tight end who turns out to be a top 5, top 10 tight end, that's a guy you want to get. Okay, so now coming back, this gets really interesting because we need a corner. And although, but we need a guard. And I like Keon Rutledge. He's a guy who I've said all along we can wait and settle for him in the 3rd round. He's kind of climbing up though. So I'm gonna stick with who I normally would like to pick here. And I think getting the guard is important. And I'm going to take Keon Rutledge. So let's take a look at where we are so far with our picks. We've got McNeil-Warren, who I feel is immediately a starting safety for us. We've got Eli Stowers, who I think is a star tight end for us. and I got Keon Rutledge, who I think is a long-term starting guard for us. So now with my second pick here, and again, if you're joining late, I'm doing this under the assumption that we have somehow wrangled Devontae Adams. So I didn't go wide receiver with my first couple picks, but that does not mean I'm going to ignore the position. Let's see what's available at the wide receiver position. Ted Hurst. Is it a little early at pick 85? Probably, but man, I like this guy. I didn't necessarily watch as much and know as much at the beginning of the draft process, but I really like him. He's actually the guy I thought Malachi Fields was at the beginning of this process. So I'm gonna take Ted Hurst and run here with my pick. So I feel like we've got a good draft going here. We picked a top wide receiver to go with Devontae Adams and DK and Michael Pittman. We've also got a huge wide receiving core, which Mike McCarthy likes big wide receivers. So that's going to be an interesting one. So if we can put that out there, and then you throw Eli Stowers out there, Pat Freiermuth on passing downs, Darnell out there, this would be a fun offense to watch, especially with Aaron Rodgers at the helm. So now our last pick of the third round. So we don't need a center. I like Jonah Coleman. He's an interesting running back. I really do like that guy. But I got Markel Bell right here. Now, is he a project? Yes. I already got a safety, so I see Zachy there, and I do like Zachy. I like Zachy a lot. Okay. And am I ignoring a top linebacker here? Potentially. I'm going to gamble that Deontay Lawson falls to us in the fourth. And I'm going to take the project tackle because let's face it, if the guy's 6'9" and you can get his footwork right, then you could really have something in the second round. You could really have something. So now we're coming back. Did I risk it? I risked it. No biscuit. So no Lawson for us, who I think is a tailor-made green dot guy. So Takario Davis is a guy I like a lot. I think I'm going to go Takario Davis here. Chris McClellan is an interesting guy. If 6'4", 323, he's a big guy. I don't know if he's a true nose. You could maybe put 15 pounds on that guy, but I also am starting to think more and more the Steelers are shifting to a 4-3. It won't happen this year. I know they said they're going to play 3-4 because they've got the personnel for it. But they're starting to stack interesting guys on the defensive line who in a 4-3 alignment might be a little bit better off. So based on what's available here, I'm going to take the big long corner. I like big I like big tall corners if you're familiar with my draft strategy, so I'm definitely taking it. So now we're moving on to our second pick in the fourth round. Got some interesting guys here. This is a guy I like a lot. It might be a little bit of a reach here. Let's take a look at who's left at linebacker before we make the pick here. I'm not a fan of Torian York. I do not like undersized linebackers. That's the Devin Bush hate in me, I guess, but he's a guy I'm not overly excited about. I think there's some guys who are interesting names later in the draft. So I'm going to pass on linebacker. I mean, it looks like we're going to pay Patrick Queen a bunch of money to stay here. If we can't get Jacob Rodriguez or Deontay Lawson or Anthony Hill Jr. or maybe Trotter, and you got to spend the first couple of rounds. And I'm kind of happy with what we did here, so I'm gonna pass on him. So based on that, I'm going to take the guy who I think can help us on the defensive line, and that's Tim Keenan. I see him as a more traditional type nose from Alabama. He's also a guy who could transition and maybe play, if you go to a 4-3, who could play the defensive tackle and be fairly effective. All right, so let's take a look at who we got available in the fifth here. So Katron Allen's an interesting name, really interesting name. And based on what's available to us here, I've been taking Eli Raritan in the later rounds. I didn't do that this time because I'm banking on the Devontae Adams thing. So I'm going to go ahead and take Katron Allen, a guy with a lot of burst, an interesting guy. And at this point, let's face it, the carries behind Dowdle and Warren are going to be few and far between. But an explosive guy who could maybe house it, nice guy to sit behind him. I'm also a little bit worried. I've said this before. I'm going to say it again. I have a sneaking suspicion that Roman Wilson and Caleb Johnson will not make the team. They may end up on our practice squad. But and somebody in the league will probably, hey, he's a third-round pick. It's only a couple of years. I'll take a shot. Great. Then maybe we get a comp pick or something out of it. Who knows? But I just have a sneaking suspicion that both their days are very numbered in Pittsburgh. If Caleb Johnson were to make the team, I know he's not going to be running back kicks. But if he were to make the team, maybe he can show something on special teams in the preseason tackle or something like that. I don't see a spot for Roman Wilson. And based on the fit in a Mike McCarthy offense, I'm not getting it. I don't see it. So if you're a Roman Wilson fan, sorry. Maybe he'll do good somewhere else, but it is not going to be in Pittsburgh. Okay, so we've got a lot of the need positions here. So taking a look at what's available, I really like these two guys at linebacker here, Jack Kelly. Harold Perkins has got tools. So based on the fact that I'm picking him in the 6th round, I'm going to take the tools guy. And I'm going to take Harold Perkins and take a gamble that an LSU linebacker can pan out sitting in your behind Wilson, Holcomb, and Queen. So let's see what happens. Okay, so now we're in the 7th round, and I've been getting my quarterbacks here. So let's take a look. Cole Payton is still there in the 7th round. Apparently, PFF is not as high on Cole Payton as I am, and some of the draft experts are. So I'm going to take him and run. Nothing like having a potential 6th round draft pick and Will Howard compete with 7th round Cole Payton, who I think has a better arm. Will Howard's probably more mobile, although Payton's not a statue back there. Could be an interesting fit if we get him. So we got 2 picks left. Now we took Katron Allen. I like Roman Hemby. I like him a lot, especially when you get him in the 7th round. But I'm going to take a guy that friend of the show, Somber, loves, Caden Wetjen. Look, is he a short, small guy? Yes. But we got a freaking basketball team out there at this point. We need a short, small guy who's fast. So give me some Caden Wetjen at this spot in the draft. I don't think we can go wrong there. All right. And for our last pick, Devontae Smith's an interesting guy. Eric Gentry is a guy who's big and tall. A lot of interesting tools on that guy. I mean, if you could harness him, maybe, but if you watch him play, he's got really skinny legs. And I don't know if that translates to the linebacker. So, based on what's available here, got the Notre Dame corner. He's okay. Vinny Anthony, we're kind of getting down here a little bit. So, we're going to go based on value here. We're gonna take a flyer on the guard from Georgia. Can never go wrong with a big guy. See what happens. Let's see what we grade out. All right. So they think we should have taken Blake Miller over Emmanuel McNeil-Warren. There's a lot of buzz about tackle for the Steelers now in the 1st round. I don't see it. There was some positive news about Broderick from a health standpoint. Dylan Cook, I think you could maybe get a guy in the 3rd or 4th round and maybe project develop. I don't see taking a tackle in the 1st unless it's a versatile guy who can play guard and tackle. But am I really wanting that in the 1st round when there's so many holes on this team? Probably not. So I'm going to stick with that. So we got a C+ for McNeil-Warren. PFF does not like safeties. Eli Stowers, I don't care. That guy's – look, I get it. The kid from Oregon is a monster. But, man, when you look at this guy's measurables and how he scored athletically If Sadiq isn't in the draft, he's probably the number one tight end. And I don't know that I don't like him a little bit better as a blocker than Sadiq. Not that Sadiq's a bad blocker. They're both great players. I don't think you can go wrong either way. But if I can get McNeil Warren in the first and Stowers in the second, I think that's a little better than getting, say, Sadiq in the first and maybe getting a guy like Zach Eaton in the third. So that's just my thought. A- Keelan Rutledge. This guy's climbing. He's climbing. I mean, he's not quite as polished as Pregnon to me as a run blocker. And he's certainly no Vega. I don't know that he doesn't catch Basantis at some point for the third guard here. But that being said, if the Steelers got him in round 3, I'd be ecstatic. Ted Hurst, PFF didn't like it at 85. I don't really care. Give me the 6'3", the guy who can run, and put him out there. Devontae, DK, Michael Pittman, Pat, Eli Stowers, and give me some Darnell at the goal line. Oh. I mean, that's just weapons galore. Markel Bell, I'm telling you, this kid's a comer. I got a really good feeling that you can get this guy in the 3rd, 4th round, and he's going to be a player. I just feel it. 6'9", huge guy. Miami got all the way to the championship game. He's got some work to do on his footwork. He does. But you draft him and let him sit for a year, you could have a guy who could have been a first-round talent if his footwork was right. Takario Davis, 6'4" guy who can run at cornerback, sure, why not? But, kind of worked out for Seattle, so give me the big guys who can run. Tim Keenan, they didn't love the pick here, but that being said, I think he's a true nose. Katron Allen, we got an A-. Harold Perkins, we got a C+. Again, I'm drafting on traits there with Harold Perkins. Do I think that he is going to immediately step on the field? No, but he could be a special teams contributor. And a year or two down the road, maybe he's the guy out there with, Peyton Wilson, or who knows who it'll be at that point. Cole Payton, I love. I also don't think he's going to go in the 7th round. I think PFF has lost his damn mind. Big fucking news there. Caden Wetjen, C+. Usually you get a better grade for taking him that late. And Micah Morris, Georgia guard, got a little upside. We got a B-. Is it a B- draft? I don't think so. I think it's pretty good. It's not Casey Concepcion and Jacob Rodriguez in the first 2 picks, but hey, what is at this point? I really appreciate you guys hanging in there. Sorry about the voice and everything, the cold, the technical difficulties. That being said, we're going to be back on Friday. Chris from PGH Chris TV is going to join us. He'll be back on 6:30. It looks like he's going to be a regular on Friday, so we're excited to have him back. He's over covering Raw. I highly encourage you to check out his pro wrestling stuff. It's really, really good. They do a great job over there of breaking down. If you're a fan of pro wrestling, WWE, AEW, TNA, you name it, they cover it. And they also get a lot of cool interviews with some of the wrestlers. So, yeah, definitely check them out. And that's basically all I got tonight. I promise I'll go longer next week when I don't have the flu. Like, share, subscribe. I appreciate you guys watching. And I will see you next week. Actually, I take that back. I'll see you Friday. So, have a good week.
And just like that, I left everything. See ya!